the message from all of the different religions that realize it's all the same thing they're saying. And why can't somebody just
People have, and books have been published like that, but they just
They aren't exactly bestsellers.
yeah, they don't. That's exactly what I was going to say. They just people don't buy them.
Yeah.
And I've got great books like Lao Tzu, Krishna, and Yeshua. I've got the Tao Te Ching, Yeshua, and the Buddha. Living Buddha, Living Christ from Thich Nhat Hanh, an amazing book. But they're all
We've got
just
the essence
short
of
runs.
reality.
Yeah.
No, but I've got good books too, though. Don't let them throw you off on that. But Essence of Reality actually is it's a challenging, and so is the Psyche Exposed. It's very
Pichet.
is that what it was? Pichet? No, I didn't get a
You have a
Pichet.
real one,
I actually bought mine on Amazon.
Yeah, it was
But,
pretty amazed at that.
They misspelled the
reality? Was
title
that
of
written
this
by a scientist?
book.
Well, what I find interesting is you talk about the three religions based on Abraham. But when you read the Old Testament, he's a real sweetheart.
Are you in church?
I mean, who would want to base the religion on
Oh, I
him?
did.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I did start both of
On
them. This
Abraham.
one actually's got a better than what that
I mean,
one
if
is.
you
It's
look
right
at
on
what
both of us. So.
He basically was going to sell his wife and
You
his
can edit them and
sister
have 2 camera shots and
to keep him.
Except that this one is because I didn't put it straight up. It's like sideways because
So you're
I was just
like this.
yeah because I was using it for the
the
sound. So
conference was held in Pisa.
inside the tower.
The other thing I want to find out is
Dale,
if
you
you
were
know
talking
what
about
the
the manger
translation is
or the stable,
in
and you didn't
Genesis.
believe
It
that
says they ate
the
from the tree of
stable was
life.
not in the
What
Bible?
was the
or-
It's not there. Look for it.
Or tree of knowledge.
There's one place that
Tree of
says
knowledge.
house.
Oh.
Stable is something our brain adds in because of the manger scene that we actually got
Give you a
from St.
wild
Francis
take on
in
that,
1223.
Well, actually, there was a PBS program that talked about the life at the time of Jesus, and that most childbirths were in the manger because
I'm not talking about the manger. I'm talking about the stable.
it was there.
Remember?
Well, that's where the, well, isn't that where the animals were kept, because they were like, first floor was for the kitchen?
You're confusing two concepts. The stable is the structure. The manger is just the feed trough. And this morning I was very clear that they didn't have a lot of wood. A feed trough was very feasible. An actual stable is not. And also it says manger. It doesn't say stable. You're confusing two different insights there. Yeah.
An interesting point there that Dale and I have also discussed is if you, most of the Christmas nativity story comes from Luke. If you read what Matthew says, it's a whole different thing. Rather than living in Nazareth and going to Bethlehem for this non-existent census, in Matthew they live in Bethlehem. And the wise men come after Jesus is born, and the star stands over top of their house. Which, of course, you tell me sometime in the night sky what star is over top of you. But anyway,
Of the
they
house,
come,
no less, when you're inside.
of the house, right? So they find it. But let's say they find it.
Yeah, but
and
they had the miracles back then.
That's
That's
right.
right.
Yeah.
They have skylights, that's what it was.
So in Matthew, Joseph has a dream that they're in trouble and Herod's going to kill all the little children, so they flee to Egypt for 2 years. And when they come back, Archelaus, who was the son of Herod the Great, is now in control, so they don't want to live there. For some reason, Herod didn't bother them, but they don't like Archelaus. He really was a jerk. Actually, the Romans got rid of Archelaus shortly after that. So they go back to Nazareth. Whereas in Luke, they live in Nazareth, go to Bethlehem, and then go right back to Nazareth. And they have to go right back to Nazareth because Jesus has to be circumcised, or there's a ceremony.
I don't remember which one it was, but
The
yeah,
point
it was-
being that the two stories cannot possibly both be right. But mostly they just truncate them and stick them together and make it all together. You can't. The
I don't
two
think there was a
stories-
lot of thought process
No.
in.
Well-
I think they were rushing in a way. It just seems like there
Matthew and
wasn't.
Luke. Well, the thing was, Mark had no account of the birth. But by now, a few years later, they have to come up with two things. One is everybody in late first century knew that Jesus lived in Nazareth. He was from Nazareth. So they have to end up in Nazareth. But they wanted to justify Jesus as being this new Savior coming, so there were Old Testament, or scriptural passages saying that a great leader, the son of David, would come from Bethlehem. So they both made up stories. Luke made up a story and took him from Nazareth to Bethlehem and back, and Matthew made up a story that had to be Well, okay,
I'm kidding.
You're outing them.
one or the other made up the story. Only one
Or
can
both.
possibly be true, and probably both. Right.
Bart,
We're in
speaking
Michigan
of Bart,
now, we can talk freely.
Bart Ehrman is very there's a program from Bart Ehrman that I've got. It's like a 5 or 6 DVDs, and it comes with a good booklet. It's called The Historical Jesus. That's awesome, with the Christmas story, Apollonius of Tyana. It's pretty cool. He goes really deep into the Sadducees, the Pharisees, the Essenes. But of course, in that he comes to that apocalyptic.
Yeah, that's a good point. Let's get to that.
Talk about what it was
right
that we didn't agree with, basically.
This is a good book.
And we'll have different viewpoints on why we don't quite agree with them on that, I'm sure. But
This particular book is by my same publisher, the same publisher I have in England. And David Bolton looks at all of the different studies of the Testaments for what conclusions are come to as to what Jesus was. And he starts off with a quote from Albert Schweitzer, who was one of the first to really look for the historical Jesus 100 years ago. And he says the search for the historical Jesus is like looking down a dark, deep well. And when you look down there, what you see is a reflection of yourself.
Oh, wow.
Because generally, when you go into actually virtually any religion, but certainly the New Testament, there's a wide range of points made for what Jesus did and how he did it, that if you think he was A, then you'll find evidence for A. If you think he was B, you'll find evidence for B. And A, B, C, and D are basically these. Fill in any that I miss or correct me. A wandering, an itinerant preacher. A Jewish rabbi, speaking strictly from Jewish customs and so forth. A wise man, telling you how to live your life with the suggestions as to how to live in the here and now. An itinerant healer who was flushing out these evil spirits and getting people to be healthy again. An interesting point on that being, and one that is indicates that this passage is pretty accurate. When he goes back to Nazareth, he can't heal anybody because they don't see him as this charismatic itinerant healer. They see him as the kid who grew up here, and who does he think he is to be able to heal
I
people?
can relate to that
was
one.
easy.
Anyway, you've got this wide range of, and of course the big one that Bart Ehrman concludes, and a lot of them do, is that he was an apocalyptic end of days teacher.
That it was imminent, happening any day.
Happening any day now. And what that all came about was, remember I said that, but at the time of David, the Jewish empire, or the small kingdom of the Jews, was independent. And it was for a period of time, but not long after that, picture the Middle East with Babylonia and Persia and Egypt and the Hittites up to the north, what's now Turkey. They were surrounded by, and of course the Phoenicians over in Tyre, surrounded by aggressive, powerful empires. So it didn't take long before that little kingdom crumbled, and they were conquered by the Assyrians first. They were then later whisked off to Babylon by the Babylonians. They were freed by, I think it was Darius of Persia. They came back, reestablished the kingdom. But at the time of Jesus, there was this deep yearning by the Jewish people, who have always been hot-blooded, strong believers in their customs and their traditions and their God, for freedom. So what they were looking for in this mainline apocalyptic idea, because it was frustrating psychologically, you were always under control by outsiders, and your leaders, Herod and the house of Herod, Herod Antipas and other ones that came after Herod. Herod the Great died about the time Jesus was born, and his son Herod Antipas was just about as bad, and they were ruthless. But they had to be, because otherwise there would have been no order. They were always under control. These guys were in cahoots with the Romans, who were the current controllers. And if it hadn't been the Romans, it would have been the Parthians to the east from Persia. If the Romans hadn't conquered Palestine and held it, the Parthians would have. There weren't enough people among the Jews to hold an empire by themselves against all the other powers that wanted to do it. So anyway, and one of the other, I don't remember if it's Crossan or one of the other scholars, brings out the point that psychologically, through time, if you ever have a group of people that are repressed and held under, they start to fantasize. They start to think, well, okay, things are bad now, but they're going to be better, and our God will come and save us. So the standard notion that grew up was this apocalyptic ending, that Yahweh, He's punishing us now because we were apparently not so good for the last 800 years, but things are very soon going to be fine, where Yahweh's going to come down on earth and establish and kill all our enemies, get rid of the Romans, and set up this kingdom of heaven, this wonderful place on earth. And that's what's going to happen. And it's going to happen any day now. So there were numerous apocalyptic teachers. John the Baptist is the most noted, because he's written up pretty well in the Bible.
And he's pretty obviously apocalyptic in his teaching.
The end of days are coming. Repent now, because God's going to judge you, and He'll raise the dead. But if you're a bad guy, He won't raise you. You'll be stuck in hell for eternity. But if you're good, He'll raise you, so you better repent right now. And then on to the next time with the same message. So there's enough of what Jesus said that He can be interpreted as this apocalyptic figurehead.
He was right about his own life, by the way.
Which-
It was about to end.
Right, John, yes, he did, by speaking out against Herod.
And it was not pretty the way it ended either.
Herod Antipas had taken his brother's wife, what was her name? Salome was the daughter.
Right.
And Salome, I mean, it was a big mess, and it was, to try to explain that, I keep going back a step, and there are too many steps to go back, because Herod was actually Jewish, and he should have been liked by his people because, you know, he was Jewish, but he wasn't really Jewish, because his father Herod and Herod's father came from Idumea, from Edom, the kingdom just to the south of Palestine. And they were only Jewish because 2 generations before, the Jews went in and said, look, you're either going to turn Jewish or you're going to get killed. So they all turned Jewish. So Herod was actually Jewish, but they didn't like him because he was from Idumea. And there were rebellions all the time against Herod, and he put them down ruthlessly. He'd go get the Romans, and the Romans would come in and just wipe them out. It was a very conflict-based culture.
Yeah, with some light
I'm
on
glad it's changed.
Ah, good one.
So a little bit of light on the apocalyptic thing for me is that if you look at a lot of Yeshua's teachings, they were constantly asking him, can you, I'll give you some from Thomas, can you tell us how our end will come? And his reply was, have you actually found the beginning, that now you're looking for the end? And he said, blessed are those who take their place in the beginning, for they'll know the end and not taste death. And they were like, can you tell us when the kingdom will come? He says, what you seek has already happened, but you do not comprehend it. And again, they ask basically, when's the kingdom going to show up? And he says, the kingdom of the Father is spread out upon the earth, but men do not see it or comprehend it. So if he was talking about some apocalyptic thing of the kingdom coming, it doesn't jive with the fact that he was also saying it was already here. And he said 2,000 years ago it's here. And remember what I said, that word kingdom is Malkuta. Malkuta Dashmaya, kingdom of heaven. Ta meaning feminine, meaning it's not manifest, it's not a line in the sand, you can't walk into and out of the kingdom. It's either you're conscious and present or you're not. And Shemaya, that word heaven, the ayah sound means something with no boundary, of no beginning and no ending. So either it's everywhere or it's nowhere. So he was saying it's everywhere here. And I love Bart. Bart's stuff's amazing, but he doesn't have any, he just doesn't have any concept of the Semitic understanding of what those things would have meant that he would have said. So, but even still, he wouldn't even need that. It's right in front of your face there. He said the kingdom's here.
But you have to somehow grasp this connectivity, this connectedness that you have with the world, like we've both been talking about, that you'll see that in the parables. I mean, picture 2,000 years ago, that you have a guy that comes to see, maybe he did as, was it you or somebody else was talking about the potential that he went off to the east and
Me.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, a lot of people do.
A lot of people assume that. However he did
I'm not
it.
sure whose that
You
was.
had Plotinus, for example, was a philosopher that lived in 270 AD, in the Common Era. he had several mystic experiences, and he wrote about the one. In his Aeneids, he tries to explain this, because he had a number of instances of this metaphysical grasp of this oneness that's going on. But it's hard to explain it outside the scope of what you see, because other people don't see it. Anyway, let me mention several different parts, because you started into the parables, and it seems quite likely to me that Jesus, whether it was Jesus or not, and Ed and I were just talking out here that, you know, this question whether Jesus actually existed, and I said, well, that doesn't really matter so much if you consider the Shakespeare plays, and there's a big controversy whether Shakespeare really wrote them.
I actually just read a great book about how it was, and Zimmerman even hit on it in his talk, that it was a transmission. So,
well, whatever it was,
yeah.
who wrote it is much less important than the value of the plays in examining and exploring human nature. If it was Bacon or somebody else, so what?
Sacrilege.
So if it was Jesus or Lao Tzu, there's a great controversy whether
Lao Tzu. Does anybody know what Lao Tzu means? It means old sage or old man.
The guy.
No idea. We have no idea who wrote it.
Yeah, but it's reported that he wrote it, the Tao Te Ching. Whether or not it was him or somebody else makes the words no less viable. Anyway, I see 6 different types of parables that indicate to me that Jesus had a clear recognition of the connection between himself and the world around him. But he couldn't ever phrase it in such a way as either Lao Tzu did, or he couldn't talk as I do, like about psychological roots to real problems. Those words didn't exist, and the concepts didn't exist in the minds of the peasants that he was talking to. He had to put his recognition into little stories where they could grasp the story and perhaps start to come to see it. So there are 6 types. The one type is a small thing that dominates all. When you come to see the connection of you with the world, just the other day when we did a little exercise of self-hypnosis and using a pendulum, Pat over here had shoulder pain, and she found a psychological root from her childhood where she was told by a parent that she was to help support her.
I was responsible for my brother.
Responsible for her brother.
Very benign. It was just at a relative's house. It wasn't meant meanly or anything, but.
But psychologically, that was a weight she held on her shoulders, and she had a shoulder pain that went away pretty quickly.
I'm going to be able to bowl in September, I think.
Yeah. Just from that. So the connection's very real. It's a small thing, but once you recognize it, you go looking, because when you've solved a couple of little problems, you want to solve the bigger ones. So Jesus' stories about that were the mustard seed, where a mustard seed's a small thing, but it grows into a big bush. Or yeast, that you take a little bit of yeast and put it in bread and it spreads through the whole bread. Or a hidden treasure, where a guy finds a treasure in a field and he goes and buys the field so he owns the treasure. All little stories like that. The second type is a new awareness that doesn't fit into old thinking. And these are brilliant. You can't put a new piece of cloth on an old coat. The coat has shrunk and the new cloth hasn't. So if you put a piece of new cloth to patch an old piece of clothes, when you wash it, the new piece will shrink and pull away. So, and the same with a new wine and old wine sacks, because new wine will expand and blow up the sacks. So you can't take these new ideas and fit them into your old way of thinking. You have to get rid of the old way of thinking and have a new way. The third type is patterns that form in life. There's one, the 10 servants, where the gist of it is, whoever is given more gets more and makes more out of it. Whoever is given little loses even that. That basically you find in life, people that have a lot, their patterns, their way of doing things, no matter what they do, it works. And some people, no matter what they do in terms of health or relationships, it doesn't work. So he's kind of emphasizing this patterns that are formed in your life, that to those who have, more will be given. The fourth type is the immediacy of the moment, the awareness of a now moment. From Luke, the kingdom of heaven is within. It isn't this future thing coming when you're always going to ride down in the clouds. It's within. It's within you. And the Gospel of Thomas It's not in the sky or the sea, because the birds will come before you. It's not in the sea, the fish will be, but it's within you and outside of you. And that's how more clear can you be than that? And in the one of the synoptics, they ask him, when will the new world come? Just as you already said that. It has come, but you don't know it. And then, this is a very key one, that he's talking to the people around him and they ask him that same thing, when will the kingdom of heaven arrive? And he said, some of you will not taste death before you see the kingdom of heaven. Meaning, presumably, and I don't know whether he got that
Some
right.
of you standing here, he
right.
even says, standing right
I don't know
here.
whether he got that right, because the disciples don't seem to have really picked up on it, but he's saying that you will see it, that it's available to you. Just look around and see this. The fifth type, oneness, that you're not separate from the reality. There are 3 references in the Gospel of Thomas that relate the inner to the outer. I'll have to find those because I don't have them marked here.
Make the inside like the outside, and the
Yes.
outside like the inside.
Yeah.
So that the male, the female, one and the same, so that the male not be male and the female not be female. That's one of them.
Yeah, that's one.
It's part of one, but.
And the 6th one is to clear away old notions, and that is both in the Synoptics and in Thomas, where he entreats people to become like a child, to be born again. And whenever I discuss this, I always make the comment that in our day and age, when people are born again Christians, they take the same old ideas they had in the last incarnation right into this one, because it doesn't mean this, obviously phony chanting and being born again. It means shedding your old ideas, clearing away the debris of ideas that are keeping you from seeing the world, and see the world like a child, like a baby, who isn't plagued with all the ideas of our culture until he or she reaches 3 or 4 or 5 years old, and then he's got them all.
Really clear in Aramaic. It doesn't. It's one of those things that I'll say in my talks where I'll say, we're told Yeshua said you have to be born, and people say again. And I was like, well, in the Aramaic, what it says very clearly is born, a word that means from the first start or the first beginning. You could say born anew, but that's not quite it. So it's not like you're birthing a new mask, but it literally means going back to the beginning. Like if someone were saying, you're doing this race and you're going around the race, and you don't stop halfway in the race and then say, okay, I'm going to start the race again. They're talking about going all the way back to the beginning, before all the concepts, the ideas, their mother and the father, and who you think you are, and your relationships, and your, career, or whatever it is. Before all of that, all your concepts of and going back to that first start, which, I touched on it a little today, that people ask about the I am phrases, and he wasn't talking about himself. He said ina, which means I in Aramaic, 2 eyes. I inside of I is the translation of that, but. Anyway, I'm going to stay focused on.
Well, that's it. No, those are the 6 points, and I think you see what I mean. That these references, these little stories, can't be about. They aren't really wise teachings. You talk about a mustard seed or new cloth on old coat. You could probably, as traditional Christianity has done, twist that into some kind of meaning like they want it to be. But it's really clear what he's talking about. New ideas don't fit into the old ideas. Get rid of the old ideas, have a new garment instead of trying to patch up the old one. Really, really clear.
It's clear too that he says, and it's in the Synoptic Gospels. I don't remember which of the 4. I don't think it's John, but he says, they say to him, one of the disciples says, why do you always speak in parables? And he says, to you it's given to see the kingdom. Remember, kingdom, feminine, not masculine. To you it's given to see the kingdom, but to those outside, everything is in parable. He doesn't say to those outside the house. He doesn't say to those outside the discipleship. It's basically, to me, when I see that, I don't know, I wasn't in his mind, but I see him basically saying to those outside the kingdom who aren't within that awareness of that oneness, everything is coded, everything is parable. You won't see anything for its true nature. You're only going to see the effect of it. Words are effect, texts are effect, religion's effect. All that stuff is all effect. But when you have that, get the essence of reality, and you understand the interplay, and that all that interplay is happening within one singular process, then you start to see that, okay, here, there's no way I can explain that to someone that's still thinking of me plus God, or me plus my dog, plus the earth, plus the sky, plus, and that's one of those things I think that in Aramaic, why it had to be really difficult. If there was a guy named Jesus that said this stuff, I can't imagine it'd be like me going into the hills where I live, and there's people that still don't come down off the mountain, that do not have running water, that do not have electricity. And I've met some of them, and they occasionally will come down, or I'll occasionally go up and people will introduce me. And they're just really simple, and I would never say dumb. Incredibly smart, incredibly intelligent, but they don't have all this crap like in their mindset. It's just they wake up every day. What am I going to do today? I got to feed the chickens. I got to get the water from the creek and and it's just a whole different way of thinking. And I can throw an Apple iPad in front of them and say, look, check it out. You can go find anything you want on this thing, and they'd be like, how do you explain it? And if I didn't have the iPad, how do I explain that to someone who's never seen one? Or land a plane in the middle of the jungles of South America. People have never seen anything other than condors and whatever it is that's flying there. And all of a sudden, this big, huge thing comes and it lands, and all these people walk out of it. It's like this big, huge, shiny bird.
Yep.
And then it sits there, and then all of a sudden, all these people walk back a while later while these, villagers are looking through the trees, and the thing closes up again, the bird flies away again.
Uh-huh.
You know what I'm saying? There's no way to, if they had never even seen that, to go and tell them about a plane. What are you going to say? Well, it's like a bird. But it's not a bird, and it's not alive. It's something that we created. We made it, and it's shiny, and it's kind of tough, and it's hard, and it opens up on the side, and someone gets in and drives it. Well, how do you say drive? We don't drive. Well, they make it go that way, and the other people get in, and they sit with them and ride with them while the person in the front makes it go that way up into the sky here, and and the parables are spitting all over. Oh my God, I'm so excited. The parables are brilliant because even in I don't know if it was foresight or what, but you can put that into not only so that more people can understand, but you can take that through all these different translations, and the essence is still there. To me, that's pretty cool.
Yeah, that's true.
That's cool. Not meaning low body temperature, meaning, that's a good thing.
I think, just pondering that a little bit, because a lot of stuff got introduced that we already talked about that, of how whatever Jesus did for 40 years was passed along and finally written down. Actually, it was probably written down before that, but those things are lost. But no matter what, these ideas were recorded in something we have and later changed a little bit and changed a little bit. But yeah, clearly, these parables came through, to my mind, without much editing. You can't say something like that, like these specific parables, without seeing it clearly. They would be, you couldn't say them because they would be totally meaningless to talk about a mustard seed in terms of the apocalyptic God coming down, or in terms of a wise teacher. What does a mustard seed have to do with me telling you how to live your life? Well, clearly, there's vision there.
Do you have a copy of Thomas? Does anybody have a copy of the Gospel of Thomas here? Because there's a phrase that I would love to.
Here are a few of them, Dale.
I want the last one, the last
I'm
saying.
not sure if you.
I don't think it's in there, but.
Here, these are the ones.
Does anybody by chance if anybody get my CD set and it comes with a bonus pack? Does anybody by any chance have the bonus pack with them? Because it's in there.
No, it's in my room.
It's in my car,
It's in my room.
up front,
Is it right there?
right in the front of in the building, yeah.
Let me double check to see if it's really worth the time to illustrate the point. I'm trying to see if I've got. Yeah, could you grab it real quick?
The word?
Thank you.
The one that's the word?
No, not the DVD. There was. Did you get the CD set from the bookstore? Is what
I
I'm
got it
asking about.
last year.
Okay, yeah, because the one this year I've got a. There's a really smartphone. Well, basically, I'll give you the gist of this.
Yeah, you can look it up online.
Yeah, I know. Because I don't want to get off. I want to stay on the actual.
What you're saying is you'll forget it if you don't look it up right away. You're 40 now, you're going to start to forget things.
What?
Who are you?
Huh?
My name is what?
It's something that really illustrates how, well, she's not here now, I guess she had a valid point saying, you know, what does any of this really matter? How do we know it even existed? How do we know that any of this has anything to do with what was actually there? Which is very valid. Trying to see if I can find the actual Thomas on here. There is a saying, it's the last saying of the Gospel of Thomas.
That would be 114?
Yes, it's 114. Here we go. There's the Lambden translation. That should be good. All right, I got it. Scrolling. Here we go. Lamson, not Lamza. The disciples said to him, when will the kingdom come? It will not come by waiting for 13. It will not be a matter of saying, here it is or there it is. Rather, the kingdom of the Father is spread out upon the earth and men do not see it. I referenced that one. But this is the one I wanted to hit on. Simon Peter said to him, let Mary leave us, for women are not worthy of life. Jesus said, I myself shall lead her in order to make her male, so that she too may become a living spirit resembling you males. For every woman who will make herself male will enter the kingdom of heaven. Now, that's one of those phrases that one of the people that's done a lot of great research on Thomas is Elaine Pagels.
Yep.
But Elaine Pagels is a horrible translator of text. She's great with history, but she just, so many of the insights they go right over her head. I love her dearly. Now, when I look at a phrase like this, it's funny that a lot of the different, I've been to so many things and read so much. There's Dale Martin, there's a lot of great, there's Bart, all these different people, Bishop Shelby Spong, Marcus Borg, who talk about the Gospel of Thomas. But there's a lot of scholars that'll say there's so many phrases in Thomas that don't make sense and you can't reconcile. And I'm like, I've never found one. There was the one that was the most, there's some things like, you know, that which you bring forth from within you will save you. That which you do not bring forth from within you will destroy you. And they would say that's hard to understand. I'm like, that's crystal clear. But yet, this is the one that was my challenge. And I looked at this phrase for many years. I'm going to reread it. Simon Peter said to him, let Mary, I'm going to read it one way the first time, okay? Let Mary leave us, for women are not worthy of life.
They talk about Mary Magdalene?
It just says Mary, but yeah, most likely. Jesus said, now I'm going to read it two different ways. I myself shall lead her in order to make her male, so that she too may become a living spirit resembling you males. For every woman who will make herself male will enter the kingdom of heaven. That's how 99.9% of the people are going to read that. This is the way I read it. Simon Peter said to him, let Mary, remember I said that whole prostitute Mary thing was traced right back to Peter. Let Mary leave us, for women are not worthy of life. This is how I see it. Jesus said, well then I myself shall lead her in order to make her male, so that she too may become a living spirit resembling you males. You see what I'm doing here?
Yeah.
For every woman who will make herself male will enter the kingdom of heaven. I think he was mocking them.
You think he was being sarcastic?
Yeah, I do. When I look at it, it's like, it just seems so clear. It was funny that it took me years of looking at that phrase, and then one day, I just looked at it in the right. Does that mean I'm right? No, it doesn't. But, and there's also this too. I'll see from some scholars, they'll say, and there's a validity to this. You know, I spoke a lot about feminine and masculine today. I could do a lot more than that, but feminine in terms of Gnostic, and you speak of the Gnostics, there's a lot of Gnostic ideas, and like I say, Gnostic's a wide swath, where there's the feminine, which is the inner, and the masculine, which is the outer. And it could be, possibly, that Yeshua was replying, not talking about men and women, but that he was talking about those who were more inner in their understandings and those who are more outer. And maybe he didn't reply with anything about men and women, but he replied with something different. But I don't know. I mean, like that one phrase where he says, they say, can you tell us how our end will come? And he says, have you actually found the beginning that now you're looking for the end? And I've got so many Gospels where they just talk about him howling like a child, just laughing, including in Thomas. He laughs out loud quite a few times. But
I think it must be clear that Jesus, let's say whoever wrote these things and said these things was Jesus, had to have a good sense of humor.
Absolutely.
You can't,
You'd go nuts if
Yeah.
you didn't.
especially back then. I mean, I try to
Yeah.
picture, I grew up with probably by the age of 10, I had already rejected religion and grew up in a, fairly conservative but rather benign culture in Western Pennsylvania. And I can't imagine, even
Benign.
today, growing up in an Islamic culture where the remedy for somebody speaking out against stupid ideas is death.
Kill him.
Yeah, kill them. Or at the very least ostracize them. Or a Mormon culture.
Yeah, we talked a lot about that. I was talking about how there's the Sister Wives or something. It's a reality show. I've never seen the show, but I was watching. My wife was watching Anderson Cooper a couple of weeks ago, and I walked in, and they were on, and I'm like, well, that's interesting. I want to check this out a little. I've studied Mormonism for 20 years. Never really ever came out with a clear picture of exactly what it was.
Or what?
Yeah, I know. There's not a lot there to. I mean, I've gone back
For
to.
20 years.
It's funny because the Book of Mormon to me sounds like someone trying to sound like the Bible. But it was interesting because the women were like, look, we want this. This is how we want to live. And I was really open. I was sitting there and I was really open with what she was saying. She's like, we want to live this way. He's got 4 or 5 wives and he's getting ready to take on a 5th or something. And this is the way we want to live. And I thought, well, that's great for you. But then a thought came into my mind. If she's raised within a specific mind pattern,
Yes.
and she's indoctrinated with that mind pattern, and she's taught that, this is the way life is, that you have, 4, 5, 6 wives, and you have like 30 children, and you have like 120 grandchildren, of course she probably would be okay with that. And then I started thinking, I was like really open with myself. I'm like, who's to say that there's something wrong with that? Or there's something wrong or right with that? Or that there's something wrong or right with us thinking that it's supposed to be 1 and 1, I mean, I definitely see the advantages to the 1 and 1, but the male in me sees the advantages of the 1 to 5 also.
Sure.
You know what I'm saying? Just being honest, but
Why couldn't
Think a little bit beyond that.
the
Yeah, I
woman
know.
have five
Could you
husbands?
live with 5 women?
I couldn't do it. Me, myself,
Yeah.
it's hard enough with 1. Sorry. No, I'm kidding.
No, you-
What were you
They
saying?
never say anything about having a woman having 5 husbands.
There are some cultures where that exists.
I've got a friend whose sister and mother are still in the Warren Jeffs organization. He got locked up. She has a cousin, one who was murdered, and a different sister who was basically driven insane with all kinds of weird psychological and like sexual weird stuff from the age of about 9. They barter the women back and forth, and I'll trade your 2 11-year-old twin daughters for my 15.
Who is they?
I'm saying in Mormonism, it's something
No.
that's normal in Mormonism.
Oh, it's considered normal.
But the interesting thing is that to see this friend of mine, Paula, to see her come to terms with, or still processing this stuff from like 30 years ago. She hasn't been in like 30 years, and to see her still processing that kind of stuff, and knowing that when she talks to her mother, there's no communication, not really. It's like the mother just wants her to come back to the fold, and she's just not doing it, and there's never any real communication. And it's been so heart-opening for me to see that in Paula, and to see how that kind of indoctrination. There's the video posted of the woman 2 weeks ago who got involved with it was either Al-Qaeda or Taliban leaders. She was already married. She got involved with 2 of the leaders of the organization. I can't remember which. So they, the higher up, they got them together, and he said, look, you guys cannot take the fall for this, because if you take the fall for this, the organization takes the fall. She needs to take the fall. And they were very open about this. They even have YouTube videos talking about why they decided this. So they put a burlap sack over her head, hundreds and hundreds of people there screaming, God is great, God is great. They shot her 6 times. And while people are screaming, God is great. And think about that. I mean, that's where I was talking about earlier, your own inner turmoil being mistaken as the will of God. And the more intense your turmoil, the more intense the will of God. And if you think about that, but they're indoctrinated with that. They're born with that whole thing. Now with that, I don't really have the opinion, maybe my opinion's wrong and maybe theirs is right. With that, I think some things are obvious, but,
She also, the males it may or may have not been her choice to be involved with the.
Yeah,
I'm not sure.
From what I read, at least one forced himself on her when she already had a relationship going with the other, even though there was still a husband involved, so.
There's
yeah.
just such taboos with her even going outside of the marriage.
Yeah,
so-
it's like, I'm gonna kill the catalyst, I'm gonna kill you so that I don't have to feel it anymore and I don't need to heal it anymore. And that's the same as, my thing in my life was anger, it was hostility and if I scream loud enough, you'll shut up and I won't have to feel what I'm feeling,
Well, I'm sure, Dale, as you began to study what you do, this doesn't have any ink in it, so if I go like, oh, geez, I'm sorry. What you,
Always on.
what you learn is, and I think what got you, and what got me is I got more and more into this, that you realize that when guys or women go to the seminary to learn Christianity before they become preachers, they learn all the stuff that we talked about today. The different stories, different accounts from one gospel to another, the differences from what the gospels say and what they talk about Jesus, and what Paul said for Jesus, because for Paul, Jesus wasn't this living man with his parables. He was this vision in the sky that hit Paul on the way to Damascus.
Yeah.
And for him, Jesus had already survived death, and he was coming back to save everybody. So that's a completely different story than what the Gospels picture Jesus as. And you've got historical inaccuracies, the census on the way to Damascus. If you look at the time...
Damascus, huh? I didn't realize you went that far.
To Bethlehem.
Yeah.
If you look at the time Jesus was supposed to be born, Matthew reports his story, and if you calculate that all out, because he was born in Bethlehem and Herod was going to come and kill the children, Herod died in 4 BC, so this must have happened just before 4 BC. But there was a census that was ordered 10 years later, which it refers to in the Bible during the time of Quirinius, when he was the governor of Syria. He became governor of Syria in 6 AD. So
that's 10 years.
10 years of difference. Well, I'm just saying that over and over again are these different stories that cannot be reconciled. If you look at what Paul says to the churches when he's writing these letters, all the letters from Paul were reliably written by Paul to the churches that he's established. Things that he says differ from the Acts of the Apostles, which tells about Paul's life and his travels, and what Paul thought. So actually the Acts were written later, so you would have thought that at least the guy that wrote the Acts would have found the letters and somehow tied up his stories, because there are differences that are irreconcilable.
And in a lot of ways, we have polyanity, not Christianity. We have Paulianity. We really do.
Yeah.
And he wasn't writing a Bible. He was writing letters back to these places, these towns where he could barely control when he was there, and they went into absolute chaos as soon as he would leave. And he was trying to basically tell them anything he could to get them to basically snuff up and buck up little camper, because he didn't want it losing control, because he had this Christian kingdom agenda. Man, the dude was on the move. Paul, it's insane to see how much Paul actually, and we know as a fact, how much he actually traveled. It's pretty crazy, especially back then. But
and of course, part of why he traveled a lot was because if he stuck around anywhere very long, they were going to kill him.
Good point, good point.
Yeah.
Somebody was taking over.
Paul was the
shadow.
guy, Saul was the guy who headed up the stoning of women before his big awakening. But I will say this too, though. Some of my most profound teachers that I've had in my life are the ones who were womanizers or thieves or just the most despicable creatures, and found a way through that. Kind of like me, no, I'm just kidding. No. Found a way through that, and went through a personal redemption. So I want to say, I want to say one little quick thing there, which is, don't misjudge the messenger for the message. And the other thing, if I got to cap it, my little cap would be this: don't throw the baby out with the bathwater.
Right.
It's confusing. This is hard. I get pissed off. I want to throw things across the room sometimes. But but there's something there. There really is. There's something really profound there.
Question.
Yeah.
When you.
Time's up. So.
Okay.
Now she can't talk.
Now you.
Yeah, about the, when Jesus said that he was gonna turn her into a man so she could, like them.
Mhm.
Do you suppose, because of that particular statement, that the Catholics is the reason why they said they want women to be priests?
No, because they would not touch that Book of Thomas with a 10-foot pole. That was one of the ones that went, okay, we got Synoptic Gospels here. I'm looking for the ones that are going to be best. That's basically what happened at Nicaea.
That's priceless.
Thomas was probably
That is so
look at these. Oh, well,
priceless.
we've already made our choice, so. That's probably it. Thomas was probably the first off the table. Because it talks about the explicit nature of reality. Everything is one singular whole. It's personal, direct experience. There's not a God out there. You can't have that mucking up the joint, you know. You can't control the kingdom with that stuff. So.
Can't control the people if they don't have something like that.
Yeah.
Afraid of.
So. Anywho, we're there.
We're there.
We're over actually slightly.
Thanks a bunch.
Well,
We
Tom,
wasted
what's
1 minute of
what's
your time.
final word? You've got to get a final word.
Yeah, you need a final
too.
word or a statement.
Word.
Yeah, the baby with the bathwater. I don't think you can clearly recognize the baby
Yeah.
without understanding how life works.
Mhm.
And as you begin to see that, as you see it, the baby's obvious. But it's really good to get rid of the bathwater.
Yeah.
Right, right.
Yeah.
After the second or third time.
Thank you very much.
Oh, yeah.